Good evening, everyone. My name is Madeleine Keane, and I'm literary editor of the Sunday Independent. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this very special An Post Book Awards Winners event, which is run in association with the Dublin Book Festival. I've been involved in some shape or form with both these wonderful institutions down the years, so it's a real joy to be marrying them both in one lovely event. A big hello and congratulations to my panelists, three very talented and successful writers. In the interests of scrupulous fairness, I'll introduce you alphabetically. Neville Maguire is one of Ireland's best loved chefs. In addition to running his hugely popular, much garlanded Macnean House and Restaurant in Black Lion in County Cavan and a thriving cookery school, he's a regular contributor to TV and radio. He's also found the time to write well over a dozen cookbooks, including the award-winning The Nation's Favourite Food Fast, Neville Maguire's Complete Family Cookbook, and his Baby and Toddler title. He has sold a stunning over 100,000 books in Ireland. Earlier this year, Gill Books published Neville Maguire's Midweek Meals, which on Wednesday evening was awarded Bookselling Ireland's Cookery Book of the Year at the An Post Irish Book Awards. Doireann Ní Ghríofa is a poet who writes in both English and Irish, and her work explores a myriad of themes, among them vital ones like birth, death, desire, and domesticity. She has written 6 critically acclaimed books of poetry, and her many laurels include Lannan Literary and Seamus Heaney Fellowships, the Ireland's Chair of Poetry Bursary Award, and the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature. A Ghost in the Throat, which was published in the springtime by Tramp Press, uses a compelling blend of essay and autofiction to examine the deep connection between two Irish writers born centuries apart. On Wednesday evening, Ghost won the Odgers Berntsen Nonfiction Book of the Year. Donal Ryan's first novel, The Spinning Heart, won immense critical acclaim when it was published in 2012, and went on to pick up the Guardian First Book Award, the EU Prize for Literature, and both Newcomer of the Year and Book of the Year at the Irish Book Awards. It was also shortlisted for the Impact International Literary Award and longlisted for the Man Booker. His subsequent titles include The Thing About December, A Slanting of the Sun, All We Should Know, and From a Low and Quiet Sea. Donal is a professor of creative writing at the University of Limerick. And Strange Flowers, which was published by Doubleday, won the Eason Novel of the Year at this week's Book Awards. You're all very welcome, and my heartfelt congratulations to all three of you. I'll have to confess some nerves. This is the first time I've chaired a writers' event via Zoom, but as I told my daughter during the week, Donal is a complete darling, and though I haven't yet before met Doireann or Nevin, I've watched them both in action, and they're both absolute charmers who talk for Ireland, so we'll be grand. I'll start with ladies first. So Doireann, I genuinely was completely captivated by your book, A Ghost in the Throat. Can you describe its essence for us, please?
Of course, and thank you so much. That's very kind of you. To me, it feels like an adventure story. It's the story of a very ordinary woman who becomes really interested in a woman who lived hundreds of years before her and sets out on an adventure to see how much she can discover about that other woman's life. And the name of that woman that I became really interested in is Eileen Dovney Cunnell, who was a poet, as I am, and who was a mother of young children, as I am. And the more interested I became in her, the more I felt I was getting to know her, the more real she felt to me. I mean, I think particularly the years of young motherhood can sometimes be, I know we don't say it that often, but it can be a little bit lonesome. You know, you're surrounded by people all the time. And if it's my house, plenty of noise, plenty of chaos. But you can sometimes still feel a little bit lonely amidst all that. And sometimes I think at those moments in our lives, something makes itself visible to you, like almost like an anchor is the way that I often think about it. And for me, that anchor was this really old poem. Everything was spinning like mad around me all the time. But every time I came back to this poem, it was steady, Madeleine. It was there and it was always the same. And every time I spoke it out loud, it felt as though this poet who had lived and died centuries before me was alive again, and that I was giving her words breath on my voice. And that came to feel very precious to me. And that was what set me off on this adventure.
Well, I think one of the many things, Darren, that moved me so much about your book was how moved you were by the subject. And you know, as you described yourself in a wonderful piece you wrote for the Irish Times, the woman who fell in love with a poem. So I'd like you to tell viewers, you know, what precisely about this ancient lament was it that touched you, that spoke to you?
I think the thing that spoke to me most was the fact that this voice felt alive, and that this was the voice of another woman, which was almost eerily making its way over the centuries to be alive again in our times. And I mean, it's magnificent that a work of literature can survive that long, and but particularly a work composed by a woman which survived for so long within our canon of oral literature before it was ever written down, that it survived by the fact that women were reciting it out loud to each other and memorizing it and holding it within their minds and their hearts and speaking it again, and someone else memorizing it, and that was how it reached us in some way. Like eventually it was transcribed and published and found its way into print. But I was also really enamored and fascinated by that as well. So yeah, the means whereby her voice had made its way to us was something that really struck me so deeply.
And it's interesting as well, Darren, that, you know, this Queen for Arthur Lear has had so many iterations.
Mm.
You know, Tom McIntyre's fashioned a play out of it, Bob Quinn made a film, Cleona Cussin's novel, music by Peadar Riada. It's been rigorously examined in academic context by various scholars. I think I remember all those years ago studying it myself, as Gaeilge. But you still felt impelled to find your own way through. You know, the poem wouldn't let go of you. You know, as you said, it let itself be found again and again. So how did you decide to marry what you did? I mean, I love your lists, you know, school run, Hoover, nappy change, pump, clean the kitchen, and then this.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about that for me, because I think as writers, particularly like someone like me who's very far outside the academy, and as much as I would have loved to have gone to college to study these kind of things, that like, I mean, that wasn't an option to me to be able to go and have that sense of doing or studying writing in university, you know. So I've always felt throughout my years of writing that I'm teaching myself something as I'm going along, and this kind of felt no different in some ways, you know, that I did have the sense the whole time of, you know, who am I to attempt to write about this extraordinary poem? I'm just an ordinary person. I'm not like, you know, any of those extraordinary artists that you mentioned. I'm not a professor in the university. I'm not a skilled historian. But the more I thought about that, the more I realized, oh, hang on, this is fine. It's nothing bad to be just an ordinary person like I am. And like ordinary people go on these kind of adventures all the time. Like I love nothing more than talking to someone who has assembled with care and with diligence their family history. And this is essentially what I was doing. This woman came to feel like a member of my family to me. And there I was studying her life, trying to teach myself the skills that it requires to go into archives, to go into old birth certs and death certs and everything. And you know, that was a process of giving myself permission to get to know someone else. And like, that's okay. I think that that's part of why readers have responded so strongly to this book, because I really tried to draw the reader along with me on the sense of detective work, investigation, adventure, but also let them into the fact that it is very much not an expert that they're dealing with who's narrating this book. It's someone whose life is a bit of a shambles. That's me. And that I'm welcoming them into the fact that things are a little bit shambolic, but that I'm trying my best and I want to bring them with me. And I do think that people respond to that, you know.
Well, I love the way, you talk about it, it'll be fine and ordinary and a shambles. I think it will stand as one of the definitive texts, actually, on Evelyn Dove. And all this, as you say, and that's what made it so wonderful, the detective, the novel, the poetry, the motherhood, and yet funneled through a dreamlike process, you said, in some ways. Some of it was almost written between waking and sleeping, which really interested me.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the processes of art and of composing literature come to us in that time between wake and sleep. I think any kind of creative work does, and I think that that's something that's open to all of us as adults. You know, I think we get the notion at some point as adults that, some of us anyway, that like, oh sure, that's behind me now. Like any of us, if you give any child four or five words and say, write me a story, make me up a little song about that, they'll do it with no fear. But there comes a point for us as adults where we start to think, oh no, sure, why would I bother with that kind of a thing? And I feel like I can speak to that because I only started to write in my late 20s, you know, when I was on maternity leave for my job as a primary teacher. So I came to this whole lark very, very late in life compared to a lot of people. And I think that it can be really interesting, that sense of between wake and sleep, as you say, and that sense of dreaming your way into something. And I mean, I'm sure Donal has had that experience. I'm sure Nevin has too. Like that time where you're just about to fall asleep and you're just like, I just had a great idea for a recipe to tell Marty Whelan. This is going to be magnificent, you know? Like you do have that space where it's almost like your to-do list switch themselves off in that golden time right before you fall asleep. And that's when these ideas can come in. And I do think that happens for all of us, not just writers, not anyone just in creative work, but for all of us as people. Like that can be such a precious time between dream and wake.
Well, I was dreaming about the three of you last night, I can assure you. And actually, I was going to move to Donal because, Donal, hello there, and well done on Strange Flowers. Just one of the most beautiful novels I've read in a long, long time. And I'll actually start crying if I talk about it anymore because I loved it so, so much. And you also said in an interview with Martin Doyle, how you heard the great Mike McCormack once say he had no memory of writing Solar Bones, how you thought that could be possible. But you see it now and your clear memory. Can you talk about that, of writing that first draft of Strange Flowers in UL? And your dad?
Yeah, well, I wrote the first draft very quickly, and kind of in a time of grief. And I really, when I heard Mike say that actually a few years ago at the Dublin Festival in Limerick, I was thinking, that couldn't be true. Go on with that, Mike. I love Mike now. He's a really good friend of mine. And he's a fantastic person. But I really thought, for some reason, I just didn't believe it, that you could write a whole book or a whole draft of a book and not have any clear memory of any one day of writing it. It turned out at the end of writing Strange Flowers, I only had a clear memory really of writing the very first, or the very last section, the very last paragraphs really. But I guess that happens. I mean, my colleague in UL, Sarah Moore Fitzgerald, talks about the concept of flow and how when you do strike flow and you strike it dead center, you can become completely and utterly absorbed in your task, and it can take over your whole life and your whole conscious existence, and it can become, as Darren said, it can become like that liminal place between sleep and wakefulness where you're kind of just, consumed completely by what you're doing.
And that, though, interestingly, Donal, as you've said, brought its own problems, because within that first draft, there was, I think you described it as a monstrous section, which didn't quite work out. Can you talk us through? I was very interested in that process.
Yeah, I mean, I said last night in the when I got the award that Fiona Murphy and Brian Langan saved the book from me, and Josh's adventures, in the center part of the book, were far more out there than they are in the finished product. And to be honest, I realized after Brian and Fiona had read the book and given me their notes that I was being really indulgent, and I was thinking to myself, Asher, look, this is my 6th book now. I can take huge risks here, and I can do what I want, really. That's enough of a thing, because you have an obligation towards the people who are going to read your book. Especially when you kind of have, after a while, you build up readership, and you know the book will be read, and so you can't just do it completely for yourself. You have to have a part of your focus fixed on who's going to read the book, because books are to be read. And readers are why we write. There's no other reason, except to tell a story to other people. And so it had to be, pared back an awful lot, and it had to be brought back kind of down to earth a little bit. I mean, I still like to, I'm still not risk averse as a writer, but it really made a lot of sense to me, and Marie loved it as well. It made sense to her, but it made sense to her through my prism. We weren't really thinking, how is this going to go down with people? How will people accept this? Because you're asking people to spend 14, 15 euros in a book, and to give it hours and hours of their life. You have to make sure it's going to be some kind of gratifying experience for them.
Well, the process certainly worked, because among the weighty and fascinating themes, and as always with you, exquisite language, there's this fascinating, and well-known trope in literature: the stranger comes to town. And you did this, so it's a fascinating take on that, and I wanted to know where that idea came from.
Well, it's based very closely on reality, on actual people I know and people I love. I mean, that whole kind of situation has played out in my own very close personal life, and so I didn't have to reach too far for it. And I was surprised actually when the book was being reviewed, especially when reviewing radio, where the reviewer said, "No, this wouldn't have happened in Ireland in the 70s." She was kind of suggesting he almost would have been brutalized and killed. But maybe I'm from a very gentle place, but the very small village in Tipperary where I'm from, I know what it was like in the 70s and 80s. And I know that he would have been accepted and loved. And of course, there would have been smart and snide comments behind his back by some people, because people just can't help doing that sometimes. But I don't think it would have been this terrible, brutal, violent reaction to somebody like Alexander, especially given the man that he is, the kind of person he is. But I guess, it's easy to have a kind of jaundiced, or, when our view is oblique and removed, it's easy to be jaundiced about things that were, and, to see things through a kind of the prism of contemporary times. But I mean, the place and the lexicon and the language and landscape, as always, are my own native place, a place that I love, and so I think I have it fairly right.
Yeah, that was something that really touched me and intrigued me, was to deal with racism, and this is a 1970s rural small town setting. And you did it with extraordinary deftness and grace and skill, and that must have been hard. And I was very interested to read that the publishers employed a sensitivity reader.
Yeah, actually, the sensitivity reader's focus was mainly on the Jamaican patois that I used for the Elmwood family in London, because I'm fairly familiar with patois and with that kind of speech pattern and rhythms, but you're never sure if you're, it's an awful thing to mimic somebody, and I've been mimicked myself, on several occasions, publicly sometimes, and it's a horrible feeling.
Really?
Yeah, and so I think to take the rhythms and the cadence of someone's speech and to try to represent it in the printed word, it's tricky, unless it's something that you're fluent in yourself. And of course, I'm not fluent in patois, and so I really wanted to make sure that I wasn't seen to be sending up or lampooning or mimicking people, and so it went through a process where actually the reader suggested that we actually increase the use of patois, but it seemed almost inscrutable then, and kind of a little bit too esoteric. It seemed to kind of it created a bigger distance, I think, between the reader and the Elmwood family. So I think we struck a fairly good balance, I think.
Yes, because it's hard to get right. I mean, in reading novels, and I come across obviously patois, and sometimes it can be very off-putting. So it's I imagine a hard thing to do as a writer, to make it accessible to the reader. Because I often hear the book in my head when I'm reading it.
Yeah.
So,
That's it. I often think of Irvine Welsh, actually, and how when you read some Irvine Welsh novels, you have to actually break the words down and pronounce them out loud phonetically. Like
yes.
even the A in the centre of Scotland, it becomes Scotland, and you hear yourself speaking in a kind of Glasgow or Edinburgh accent, and it's great, but it can slow you right down. It can really make the story a slog sometimes until you get used to it, really.
Yes, well, it went with, in fact, such musicality in the end. It worked really well. Thank you, Donal. I'll move to Nevin, and I think apart from felicitations, birthday greetings are in order. Am I right?
Oh, you are. Good morning, and thank you so much for having me doing this with your and congratulations to the other authors. Yeah, I'm getting old. I'm 47, and we had a double celebration the night of the awards, and it was my birthday, and it was just at home, so it was lovely. It was lovely, great.
Well, listen, happy birthday and felicitations in a very tough category, Nevin. There was Rory O'Connell, Clodagh McKenna, the happy pair. So,
yeah, I felt very privileged, even first of all, to be nominated because, I've wrote a lot of cookbooks and I feel very humble and very privileged, and, to be the overall winner, it was a great accolade for me and the Guild Book team. Nikki Howard, she's just a dynamo, and she's been so supportive to me, and she always comes up with the lovely ideas. She just gets it, and we work together as a great team. So you're right, the category was very very high and wonderful, talented people. So I felt very, very lucky to be nominated and to win. Wow, I'm still celebrating. Look I have the award here beside me still.
I believe you took it to bed.
Yeah, Imelda, my wife, isn't happy about that. I just want to clarify. I'm only joking. Yeah, well, it's not every day you win an award like this, so it was under my pillow, so it was nice. It was lovely. Honest, it's great, and I'm sure for our other authors and our winners and nominees, it's for me, for being a chef and a cook, it's a great time to be in Irish food, and I think we got to enjoy food and cooking together, and this book has maybe connected with so many people, because midweek meals, people are working. The main event of the day is the meal, really, and eating together and enjoying food. I think that really connects with people. So yeah, I'm delighted. And with this book, I suppose you eat with your eyes first. So the most important thing is when you see a dish and you see how it's created, and you're not going to be stuck in the kitchen all day. That's my job. You got to inspire people to enjoy good food and cooking from scratch. I think that's a really, really special thing.
Yes, because otherwise, as you say in your introduction to the book, you can end up eating pasta 5 nights a week. Guilty. But that said, pecan crab spaghetti with asparagus and baby courgettes for me tonight. Even the title of it sounds so lovely. And I was staggered when I was reading the book, Nevin, by the amount of recipes you have in your book, because I do know how much is involved, in writing a cookery book. There's inventing, prepping, tasting, writing, photographing, styling, the whole work. So I'd be interested to know how you organize yourself, your process when it comes to starting a new book.
Yeah, it's really, you say that, because every book you have a different kind of a theme, but it's all kind of shall we say 100 recipes for this book, 100 images. So you come up with a concept. So we've done fast, we've done family favorites, we've done the baby and toddler, we've done the Macneen. So we said, okay, midweek meals. And we were thinking, will we do midweek meals in minutes? Well, we said, that's a lovely title, but in minutes, it's not going to take minutes in a slow cooker. So that could kind of backfire. So then we said, okay, Nevin Maguire's midweek meals. So we said, okay, let's do something that people are going to be in the kitchen. It can be done in 20, 25 minutes. They're not going to be stuck, all day kind of cooking. That's really, really important. And so we broke it down into 4 sections. You have the supermarket sweep, 1-pan dinners, the low and slow, which is a great little section. And it's the first time I ever put this into any of my cookbooks, because more and more people now have slow cookers, and I get a lot of questions asked about slow cooking. And there's something beautiful about being at home. A lot of people are working at home, but the smell of food cooking, there's something special. When we think of our grannies, we think of our mothers. So when we start the process for a book, we come up with a synopsis. So we come up with about 130 recipe ideas. And then we narrow it down to 100. And then what we do, and that's with the publishers, and I have a lady called Orla Broderick, she's worked in 16 of my books. So between myself and Orla, we come up with the recipes. And the most important thing, Madeleine, is that they have to be tested. If recipes don't work, someone buys your book and they make a dish and they say, that didn't work for me, they lose confidence in your book and in your recipe. So you got to give people the inspiration once they see the dish, once they make it, and they say, I want it to look like that. It may not always look like that, because remember, it's food styled, but once it tastes, it's all about the taste. And that, as you said, good food is to be enjoyed with the family. And, you know, I think that's the process that we work on, testing the recipes, doing the photography, the beautiful design book, like it's beautifully designed. It has to look
gorgeous.
It is. And in fairness to Gill Books, you know, we work together very, very closely. There's a great team there, you know, and I mean, like, this has just been a dream come true. Like, this is my 16th cookbook. Never did I
said well over a dozen, 16,
yeah,
wow.
No. But listen, Madeleine, when I started cooking from the age of 12, I just loved food, and I love it as much now as ever. And one thing I've noticed about this year in particular, everyone has suffered and it's been a difficult time, but food, people have reconnected with food. The engagement I've got. One of my most best watched video recipes, two of them, is a chicken curry. We got 250,000 views. And then a simple omelette, 150,000 views. Now that's never happened to me before, but it just makes me realize that people are cooking at home with their family, and that's a great gift to give our children, that we enjoy food together. I think so.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. It's been one of the great joys this year. I have to say, actually, books, food and swimming in the sea have kept me sane this year. You started, I think it's 2002, with your first book was Nevin Cooks, and I'd be very interested to know how much, you know, it's changed over the years. Here we are nearly 2 decades later, you know, food and culinary writing. How much has it, what changes have you seen, Nevin?
Well, I remember the first book, Madeleine, when I did it, it took me 2 years to write it. And a lot of them were my mother's recipes. It was very nice, simple, delicious. Some people actually have the cookbook you wouldn't recognize because I've aged so much from them and now, but it was still a lovely book, published by Poolbeg. So I'd done 3 cookbooks with them, and I was on a show at that time called Open House with Marty Whelan and Mary Kennedy, and every Tuesday was my day. I cooked live, I cooked for 10 minutes, and I said, then the publishers came and said, you know, would you like to put this into a book? And I said, absolutely, that would be fantastic. It has changed a huge amount, because now it's a more slicker operation. We have a complete time plan when you have to write your recipes, test your recipes, shoot your recipes. And remember, like, this year was very difficult for everyone, even producing a book. So well done to all the publishers and all the authors. But this year we had to put back our photography about maybe 2 months. So it was photographed in May, and normally we'd have it done March and April. So that kind of led it coming out a little bit later. We still made the deadline for the end of September, 1st of October, which is great, because as we know, for Christmas. But so from the first book to this book, it's like a different operation. You just get used to it. Once you get the ideas right, once you get time to write out the recipes, testing them, and you always tweak things. Like if a recipe doesn't work, Madeleine, and many of them haven't worked when we tested them, bacon in particular, we retest, we redo them, we make sure they must work, because everyone's oven measured. So just to make sure that people have the confidence in the recipes that they're making.
You know, obviously, as both a chef and a writer, you know, the creative impulse is in you, you know, and I can see it in your book, and the titles of some of the recipes, and the beautiful, exquisite photography, and the creation that goes into a meal. And where do you think this creative impulse comes from? And Donal and Darren, you can start doing your homework, because I'm going to be asking you two in a minute as well. You know, where does that impulse to create, which is within some people, come from?
Well, Madeleine, I got my love of food from my mother, and I've been very lucky that I've done a lot of traveling, gone to different countries. I'm always learning. I'm like a sponge. I want to learn about new cuisines, new cultures, new foods. So I feel very, very lucky. But when I look at the Irish palate, how it's changed, it's become very sophisticated. Like 10, 15 years ago, this book would not have sold. People would have said, I don't know that, I don't know that. Nowadays, It's so easily and readily available to get such beautiful ingredients, but yet keeping with the core principles of local, seasonal, using Irish, supporting our brilliant Irish dairy and farmers. That's what good food starts off with. And then you can put your little spices, your little touches, you can tweak a recipe. I always say to someone, a recipe is just a recipe, it's a guideline. If you want to substitute anything, you can do that. You know, Bacon book is very, very different. But with this book, if you don't have an ingredient, that's fine. You can substitute something else. So, I mean, the creative element I get from people, I listen to guests in the restaurant, at cookery demos, at Bloom, at different food shows. I learn from people what they want and the feedback. You wouldn't believe the amount of, I suppose, lovely letters and emails and even on social media. Like the engagement has been for something so special this year. So I'm listening to people all the time. How can I help you? What can we do? How can we make life easier? You know, if you get the basics right, you can cook beautiful, delicious food and not be in your kitchen all day.
Well, that's good news to hear. Darren, a lot of ingredients in your book. I mean, it was quite a blend, wasn't it? And, you know, for you, that creative impulse is clearly very strong as well. Where do you think it comes from?
I mean, I suppose it's always kind of difficult. It's a great question, Madeleine, and it's always kind of difficult to for me anyway to give a good hard look at myself and to answer a question like that. Whereas it's much easier for me to look at other people. Like I could listen to Nevin answering that question all day, and like I could answer that question on Nevin's behalf as a fan of his, obviously. But like he has just got such great heart. Like that's always what strikes me about his work, and the striving for a connection. You know, like he has great heart and a great interest in connecting with other people and like nourishing people at a deeper level, not to get too airy fairy, but like at a deeper level as well as with food. I think that comes across, and I think that's why so many of us think of him as a national treasure, you know, and that we're so fond of him in a genuine way when we might never have met him. And equally, I think that that's why readers respond so strongly to Donald's work, you know, that there is something about certain people where there's a real sense of heart there that comes across in how Donald, for example, communicates his characters. You know, like these are, they feel like real people to us as readers because in some way they really are real, you know.
Yes.
And that's down to his skill, not just as a writer, which is really considerable, you know, but it's also down, I think, at a human level. You know, it's a rare talent to go through life and to really see the people around you and want to connect with them. And that's something that I would see in both of these men, you know, very strongly. And I think that's why readers respond so passionately to their works. And I mean, their books are so different, but that there's that core attribute there between them. For me, the creative impulse really feels like it comes from elsewhere always, like it's from somewhere slightly askew of where I am. And so I find it very hard to articulate because it's I'm very close to the kingdom of the dead, you know.
Like, good starting point.
I'm a little bit haunted, and I kind of always have been. Like I come from a very small rural parish in County Clare. I come from a place of very small, very wet fields, and where our family has been for hundreds of years. And so I always felt that sense all my life that, you know, there are people who walked these boreens before us, and those people felt very close to me, not in any kind of modern Halloweeny kind of a sense, but almost as a comfort, you know. And so whenever there's a poem or a book that's coming to me, it feels like it's coming to me from somewhere else. And I suppose it goes, I'll stop talking in a second, but I suppose it comes as well to what Donald was saying about his colleague Sarah, you know, that sense of flow. That flow for me feels almost like I'm almost absent in that, you know, and that there are these words coming in from somewhere else that I don't feel like I can almost take credit for, you know, that kind of way. That I don't know where that creative impulse comes from. Like it is quite mysterious, and it does come from somewhere else for me.
And it is, as you said, you know, that idea of connection. The great English novelist E.M. Forster said, you know, at the end of one of his novels, only connect. And I think it's so important, as in life, as in art, it's to connect. And Donal, you who, you know, connected to so many of us through your exquisite writing, you know, but you also teach creative writing, and I'd be very interested to hear, you know, your view on it, you know, and that old argument, can you teach creative writing, and where is it? Where does it come from?
Gosh, I must say though, what Erin said there is just so beautiful. It's I got kind of goosebumps listening to her speak about her process and her ancestors, and you know, and can I just say actually about Darren's book that it was just one of the most incredible experiences reading that book, because it felt so spiritual, and it felt like there was a ghostly presence in my mind as I read it. Even though, and you know, there was the quotidian element of Darren's life and the translation of this beautiful poem, and that idea of Evelyn Dove being given breath and Darren's voice was just so strong. It was the kind of book where you read and you go, oh my God, there's no point going on as a writer after this, because line for line it's just so exquisite. I mean, it's just incredible work of art. But I think the idea of teaching creative writing, I guess the words teaching and creative writing they can almost be oxymoron almost, because you know, you can't say to somebody this is what you have to do, because to be prescriptive or proscriptive, I think, about the process of writing is to almost kill it off, you know, and to kill off creativity, to make it a kind of mechanical thing. But there are certain things, of course, you have to do. You have to read a lot, you have to write a lot, and there are certain elements of a story that you have to work on, I think, to make a story sing and to make it connect with people and to make it feel real. But I think it's really important to listen very closely. And I mean, I learned so much from Joseph O'Connor and Sarah Moore Fitzgerald and all the colleagues we've had in creative writing since the start, you know, and I'm still learning every day I go into UL. I learn something else about writing and creative writing and teaching. But you have to approach it on a student by student basis, because everyone's expectation is different, everyone's ambition is different, everybody's trying to do something different with their talent and with their art, and so it's a very individual thing. And there's no real, you know, there's loads of books written on writing, and some of them are great, but there's no hard and fast list of things that you have to do except read and write, of course.
And the other thing, which is I'm always finding difficult, is, you know, it's time and headspace. The creative impulse is all very well and good and vital, but you know, all of you have busy ancillary careers, and you also, crucially, young children, though maybe yours still are teenagers at this stage, but they still demand. The 32-year-old, it goes on ad infinitum. And that's Cyril Connolly, the pram and the hole and everything. How do you carve out, it's not just physically getting into your office, but it's that headspace? Who wants to go first on that?
I'm happy to speak on that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
JG Ballard, he's just so important to me. But he said, contra Cyril Connolly, my greatest ally was the pram and the fall, and I have really felt that very strongly in my own life and in my own work. You know, sometimes when it's intensely hard to find something that's important to you, it means that when you approach that work, you will come to it with energy and with drive and with a sense of, oh my God, I've only got half an hour for this, so I'm going to give it socks. And I feel like if I was never a writer before I had kids, so I can't, maybe I'm a bad person to ask because I have no before time to compare it to. But for me in my daily life, it has definitely helped me and helped focus the mind, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
And Devin, you've got young twins and an insanely busy work schedule. Well, how do you seem highly organized.
No, I'm not. I am not. But what I do when I'm given a deadline, I definitely it refocuses. Yeah. And the twins, Connor and Lucia, they're nearly 9 now in February, and they love food. And for me, the greatest gift that I've done since becoming a parent is to cook with them and give them food and enjoy it. And I think that's really important. And you have to be a little bit disciplined because they're away at school, so I can work away at home. I'm not even 5 minutes from the restaurant, so I can pop down there in the evening. And you're given a kind of like a timetable that you have to have a certain amount of recipes wrote first, and then we have to cook them and test them. I'm lucky, Madeleine, that I have the cookery school that I can do that. And it's all about your team. I can't do it without my chefs who help me test. I bring in some of the waiting staff so they test the recipes. So anyone that tests the recipes, they're not all chefs. there are people that cook at home, and I particularly go for that. Like my wife Imelda, she's delighted because she gets well fed. She comes down, and at the likes of the front of house and that. So we have 4 or 5 people testing the recipes. I find the hardest part is writing the recipes, and then when you write them, then you test them, then you shoot them. That's the flow, or the process flow. But I feel a bit of an amateur when I listen, you know, to those 2 amazing authors who are just so passionate about what they do, and just I could just listen to them and learn from them, and just it's infection. That it's so infectious, that passion. It really is.
Thank you, Nevin. Donal, I noticed last night on Twitter there was quite a storm of excitement about all of you and your awards, and indeed the awards in general, which were so brilliantly done given the circumstances. But I was wondering, you know, it's not the first time any of you have won awards, but does it ever lose its luster? I saw Donal, one of your friends on Twitter said, hereafter you shall be referred to as His Magnificence. So His Magnificence, does it ever lose its luster because you've won so many?
No, it doesn't. No, it does not, Madeleine. It just gets better and better, actually. And you know, I mean, it shouldn't be. We shouldn't need this kind of affirmation, but it's just so sweet when it comes, you know, because you can be shortlisted and longlisted, and everybody is, and everybody has, you know, a hope of kind of the payoff of winning a prize, because it's such great exposure. And as somebody who's terminally unambitious, you know, I mean, it's just it's great to have this handed to me, because my only ambition is to write well, and there's nothing outside of that I'm ambitious about in life. And so it means an awful lot. But the Irish Book Awards really mean a lot, because because they're Irish awards. They're voted for by readers. You know, and I remember my first night when we were there together, and I got lost in the way up to the stage studio, and you were so kind to me, and it was just the best feeling. You know, it was the first time I really saw myself as a writer in the writing world. And that was so unexpected that night, and it's to have come kind of full circle almost with the novel of the year. It's just the most magnificent feeling. I really am so thrilled.
Yes, I remember that night presenting you with the Newcomer. Yeah, it was. It was very exciting. I remember that moment, because I remember where you started, and you know how you know that there'd been the rejections, and you know to come that far, and to all of you, you know, really well done. You know, we are in this, you know, so-called golden age of Irish writing, and there is such a wealth of talent out there. It's quite extraordinary, and so heartening to work in and to be part of it. And I think it was so telling that even though we weren't all kicking our heels up and, you know, having nice drinks in a hotel in our lovely glamorous gowns and black tie last night, it was still so lovely and infectious and celebratory. I really could chat all evening to the 3 of you. You know, it's unfortunately though our time is up. It's been such a pleasure, really. It has. My favourite books this year, without a doubt, the novel of the year was for me, and genuinely I say this, Strange Flowers, and in non-fiction, A Ghost in the Throat. And Nevin, you will take pride of place in my kitchen. Working in books, I have lots of books, but I have a very carefully curated bookshelf. So you'll be joining the culinary gods of, you know, Nigel and Delia and Ottolenghi and the gang. And you richly deserve to be up there.
Thank you. And you've done an amazing job, Madeleine. Thank you so much. Well done.
Thank you. Well, my sincerest thanks to Donal, Doireann and Nevin. And again, my congratulations on your richly deserved wins this week. To all our viewers, Strange Flowers, Midweek Meals and A Ghost in the Throat are all available for sale, and links will be in the chat. Also, there's another week of really exciting and interesting events happening at the Dublin Book Festival. All of you with little ones, their Christmas bedtime stories are streaming each evening and read by well-known faces, Marion Keyes, Gordon Darcy, Lord Mayor of Dublin, Hazel Chu and others. So please do check out their programme, dublinbookfestival.com. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you so much.